It's time to dive into another extraordinarily important concept to advance your ability as a JavaScript developer. And it's also a topic that causes a lot of confusion because JavaScript in this case is so extraordinarily different from most other programming languages. And yet, JavaScript, once again, much like first-class functions, is making popular a concept that in many ways is better than what is most in use right now. Let's talk about object-oriented JavaScript and prototypal inheritance. And in this course, when we say object-oriented JavaScript, we're going to focus primarily on the creation of objects, because that's where a great deal of confusion lies. So for our first lecture in this section, we'll start with a conceptual aside. Classical versus prototypal inheritance. Okay. Big word alert. Inheritance. One object gets access to the properties and methods of another object. Now remember, we're talking about JavaScript. The general idea of inheritance is implemented differently in different languages. But for our purposes, we only need to understand the most basic concept, that one object gets access to the properties and methods of another object. So I have two objects, and my first object inherits from my second object. It gets access to its properties and methods. A lot of talk about inheritance uses all kinds of crazy examples with animals and elephants and cars and trains. I think it's better just to flat out say what it does. You have an object, you have another object, and I can go get access to the properties and methods on that other object. So what do we mean when we're talking about classical versus prototypal inheritance? Well, classical inheritance, we're talking about what's currently best known and popular. It's there in C#, it's there in Java. It's a way of sharing methods and properties of objects. That's very classical. In other words, it's the way it's been done for a long time, the most popular way it's been done for a long time anyway. And right now, I'm not going to say that classical inheritance is bad. Obviously, it works, otherwise it wouldn't be so popular. However, thinking that this is the only approach and thinking that it doesn't have its downsides is wrong. Classical inheritance, and I've built plenty of large object structures with lots of objects that inherit from each other, that share properties and methods. It's very verbose. There's a lot going on, and you can end up with these huge, massive collections and trees of objects that interact, and it can be so hard to figure out how one is going to affect the other, even if you use good practice once it gets large enough. It's like building a house that's so intertwined and wrong that you change the light bulb and all of a sudden the toilet flushes. That's how it can feel with classical inheritance sometimes. And you have all these different keywords flying around, friend and protected and private and interface and who knows what else. And you have to learn what all those mean and try to use them. Again, it's not bad. But I personally have never really liked it all that much. Now, when we talk about prototypal inheritance, we're talking about something much simpler. It's very flexible, very extensible, and very easy to understand. And I'm not saying that it's perfect either, but we should understand that when we talk about inheritance in JavaScript, it's different than what we may be talking about with other programming languages. And we need to understand it. And it won't be hard to understand. And once you do understand it, you'll see just how powerful it can be as an approach to sharing properties and methods amongst objects. But just remember, when we say inheritance, we're just talking that one object gets access to the properties and methods of another object. And we're going to see how JavaScript does that using what's called prototypal inheritance. Let's move on.